accession. And looking at our efforts, they are also now committing themselves to this process, for which I would like to extend my appreciation and gratitude. And together with the above mentioned progress, transition from the factual summary to the elements of draft working party report in the multilateral negotiations is another very important milestone for Uzbekistan. This allows Uzbekistan to move from the discussion of the current facts to the reflection of future commitments that we are prepared to fulfill after the accession. In terms of bilateral negotiations for the market access, they are led with approximately 30 countries, and up to now we have completed the negotiations with 11 countries in total. With another group of 10 to 13 WTO members, we are at the final stages of completion. Certainly, there are traditionally tough counterparts in negotiations, and I would like to emphasize that even with them, we have significantly advanced our bilateral discussions. And the freshest update is just yesterday, the WTO Secretariat officially announced to organize the next working party meeting of Uzbekistan's accession to the WTO, which will be held on May 24th this year in Geneva. And alongside with this working party meeting, we'll also hold the open-ended meeting on multilateral discussions of agricultural domestic support for the first time. And you can feel that since 2023, we are holding within 14 months third consecutive working party meetings, which shows our commitment on the one side, and on the other side, the WTO members also commitment and welcome Uzbekistan in this accession process. And now, as the eighth working party meeting is on the way, currently our team is getting prepared very seriously to have it very fruitful this month.
Thank you very much. So just a little bit decode the WTO. So the bilateral negotiations are with individual members, and ultimately they will result in how much Uzbekistan opens its economy to the WTO members on goods and on the services sector. So that's with the bilateral negotiations about how much Uzbekistan opens its economy. So there are opportunities there, but there are also in some places, some areas that Uzbekistan may decide to open a little bit less, and there are opportunities and important things to assess in that context. The multilateral negotiations are about making commitments to the WTO members about how and when Uzbekistan will meet the WTO rules. So as Aziz has shown to us, there's been a lot of progress in these two areas, and WTO members do not agree to working party meetings unless they see the progress. So really, this is phenomenal that you've had 3 working party meetings in a year. But you know, the reform started a little bit earlier than that, this current phase of reform, Aziz. And so I was just kind of wondering why suddenly this acceleration over the since the decree of the president, and even from the beginning of last year, why is there such an acceleration of process at this time?
Thank you, Mandeep. Uzbekistan is aiming for ambitious goals of economic development. So we put an aim up until 2030, double our GDP, as well as be among the upper middle income country category. And I would like to emphasize that our economic policy philosophy has also changed. We don't want to rely on the domestic market alone. And achieving the mid and long-term goals without increasing the competitiveness of the economy, entering into global value chain, and getting access to international markets is apparently impossible. Besides, achievement of the targeted goals requires the implementation of large-scale projects, investment projects, which in turn necessitate quality investments to the economy. These reasons make it very clear why Uzbekistan wants to exceed the WTO. Meanwhile, you are asking why now? WTO accession actually was in the agenda of Uzbekistan's large-scale economic reforms that we started in 2017 with the coming of His Excellency President Mirziyoyev in the office. Yet back then, there were some very important systematic issues in the country that need urgent attention to build the foundation for the wider economic reforms. Foreign currency and foreign trade liberalization, as well as tax reforms, were integral part of those systematic changes. Shortly speaking, we have prepared ourselves. And after a long period of dormancy that we had before 2020, we had to start the process from the very beginning. And it's trivial that starting is always difficult and time-consuming. However, as you said, the accession process has indeed been accelerated considerably over the past year, since the pace of progress in previous years didn't align with the expected results and our goals. That's why starting from 2023, recognizing the necessity to accelerate the process, President Mirziyoyev took the accession process under his personal control, injecting some renewed momentum, as well as ensuring the pursuit of WTO membership as it remains at the forefront of our national agenda. Subsequently, a number of institutional measures were introduced in the mentioned presidential resolution of June last year. And the mandate of interagency commission led by the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Hojayev, was strengthened, and the institution of the Special Representative of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan was established with the view to facilitating and accelerating the process of Uzbekistan accession to the WTO, as well as serving as a chief negotiator in this process. We have also formed a special task force, as I mentioned earlier, under the Interagency Commission, as well as dedicated WTO divisions in over 20 involved ministries and agencies, and a specialized department at the Ministry of Justice to push the legislative initiatives. Obviously, all the measures and high-level support are of course, producing its results. Thank you.
Okay, you've convinced me. I hope the audience is also convinced. There's been a lot of work in the last year, both, and also from my perspective, working in the office of the advisor to the president. If anybody doubts the level of support, it really seems to me that this is really one of the president's top priorities, and he sees it really in the view of improving the prosperity and opportunities for the people of this country. I think this is something that nobody should doubt. It's certainly something that's very close to the hearts of the president, as we hear. So you've convinced us. You've done a lot of work this last year. But in this region, I think sometimes we hear some kind of doubts around the benefits. You know, this is a lot of work. Uzbekistan already has agreements with some other countries. Why even bother? Will this really, you've got some quite ambitious objectives to reach upper middle income status. What would you say to these people that are doubting a little bit the benefits? Quickly, though. Okay.
Very often, we can hear some people questioning why the countries should exceed the WTO. And in my personal point of view, there are two reasons why. The obvious one and the intangible impact that the WTO membership gives the countries. Doubting people very often ignore the obvious reasons of WTO accession, WTO membership, and try to devaluate the intangible factor of this membership. And the obvious part is that 166 countries are WTO members, constituting 97% of the world trade. And thanks to the mandate of this organization, the members arrange relatively fair trade among themselves. And assessing the intangible impact might be rather a bit complicated, but without any doubt, it helped to raise the competitiveness of its members. If you look at the experience of WTO member countries, bringing quality investments to the economy, enabling for the emergence of the new industries, and giving renewed growth momentum for their economies. And some people argue that some countries couldn't develop as expected after WTO membership. For those doubting people, I want to say that if those countries didn't exceed the WTO, their economic growth would be even less or worse comparing to what they had within this WTO accession period. This is my belief and this is my opinion regarding why WTO accession is very important.
Excellent, thank you. I think we will turn to Antonio in a minute and he can help us with some of the tangible and intangible benefits as well. Thank you very much. So I now want to look a little bit forward. So Aziz, there's a lot that's been done in the last year in particular, but there's a lot that remains to do. And so I would like to ask you, what's number one on your to-do list for the next month, in 30 seconds? Okay,
so I mentioned that our team is now getting prepared for the next Working Party meeting, which is happening on May 24th. And following week, for the first time, the Director General of the WTO is visiting Uzbekistan. This is, to my best knowledge, this is the first visit of such a high-level WTO official visiting non-member country. So now we are planning holding a very important high-level roundtable together with our partners, with World Bank, with the IMF, and the WTO itself. This is one of the very important job our team must do. And also, the following week after the visit of the Director General of the WTO, USTR Ambassador Tai is also planning a visit to Tashkent, which demonstrates full commitment from our side and from the WTO members of our Uzbekistan's accession. And as we hold the 8th Working Party meeting in May, I think the whole summer will be devoted for following up, doing the domestic reforms, working with the legislation, and preparing responses for the questions that will be raised during this 8th Working Party meeting. Okay, so you didn't follow my advice that you take 30 seconds, but you did actually answer the question in a much more broad fashion than I expected. I thought you were going to say 8th Working Party, but you told us there's a lot of, actually there is a lot of work. So these are just in the weeks afterwards, they will then turn your attention to the domestic agenda. And 8th Working Party meeting is clear, we are already having an eye on the 9th Working Party meeting, and we are trying to prepare the to-do list before the end of this year. Okay, excellent. So I heard some, as an economist, I heard some words that were fantastic. Sequence reforms, high level of ambition, and now I've forgotten the third one, as it's hot and it's late in the day, so I'll come back to it. Okay, Antonio, so just to recall, Antonio is the manager for macroeconomics, trade and investment in the World Bank, and he's in charge of the advice and the analytical work. So I want to focus a little bit about the analytical work that the World Bank does do, Antonio. And we were talking about tangible, intangible benefits. And I want to return to this question that I sort of asked of Aziz, that there is some doubt sometimes. It's a lot of effort, you have to open up the whole economy. You know, what are the benefits of this? And if, Antonio, on the tangible side, you have any numbers, that would be really lovely from the work I know that you're doing in Uzbekistan, but also in countries in the region or even around the world. So thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Mandeep, and of course it's a real privilege to be here. And I want to be very clear, it's nice to follow Aziz on this. There is plenty of empirical studies that show that there are enormous benefits for countries that join WTO. You know, this is sort of not even controversial. So I hear indeed there is debate, there is doubters out there, but the numbers are very strong, and I'll come to them, Mandeep. And the reason why this happens is also very intuitive, is because the process of WTO accession creates a predictable, a transparent legal framework for economic growth, for business environment, for investment. So it's not sort of a surprise to us. But let me mention there is a study which is very well known, which has looked at 135 countries, looking at before accession, after accession, comparing, and on average what it finds is that countries grow at least 2 percentage points faster for at least a period of 5 years. So that's very substantial. There is also evidence that shows that the benefits are not just on trade, they are also on trade, increasing exports, and also in the diversification of exports. So all of this is, again, is, you know, not opinion, is documented, is peer-reviewed. Now, what also the study mentions, highlights, and again, this is, you know, I'm synthesizing, but is that not every country benefits. Not every country benefits as much, and the critical determinant is the depth of a country's commitments, the depth of a country's leadership in committing to its own, in advancing its own trade liberalization. So in some ways, one could say the WTO accession is a process which enables countries, anchors countries' reforms programs. And those reforms are good in themselves because they open up the environment for trade, for business, for faster growth. And in many ways, which is where also the World Bank comes in, beyond the technicalities of, you know, reforms in intellectual property rights, in local content requirement, in customs, and in technical barrier to trade, there is also another aspect which is just as critical, which is reforms in the environment for competition, the competition law, the investment law, indeed all the aspects related to trade facilitation, import-exports more generally, all the sort of complementary laws and regulations which create an environment that can attract more investment. And this is actually the additional benefit that I really want to emphasize. What we have seen in countries that exceed WTO is a jump in FDI. The example of Cambodia is sort of you know, very notorious. Foreign direct investment increased by 600% in the period between 2007 and 2014. But there is a number of countries that have seen dramatic increases starting in the year before the accession, when it was clear that the country was ready, and the following period. You know, and these countries, they are really from all over the world. Cambodia, China is an obvious example, Ecuador, Jordan, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Panama, Vietnam. Again, and that inflow in FDI, significant, is also significant because we know from our own work on economic growth, the FDI translates into higher productivity, higher knowledge, and also, of course, faster job creation. So faster growth, productivity, job creation, and that's in a way what every country aspires to do, of course. So in general terms, there is no controversy. Now, recently at the World Bank, we've been doing a study looking at the accession of Uzbekistan in particular, at the WTO accession of Uzbekistan in particular, and I have my colleagues Pinar and Mariana here in the audience. They have led this study. The study, in fact, looks at growth and jobs, growth and employment more generally, and one of the sort of sections of it focuses on WTO. And for Uzbekistan, again, our analysis shows that the benefits would be massive. We are looking under a basic sort of trade liberalization scenario at faster GDP of at least 10%. And if we start looking also at the FDI, the investment benefits associated with it, these benefits doubles. We are looking at 20% faster GDP, higher GDP levels. This is obviously incredibly significant. We're not talking about small marginal points, we're talking about a transformative process. Now, within this, the study goes into much more detail. Within this, a lot of the benefits come from services trade liberalization. An important part of the benefits is related to trade facilitation reforms, what happens at the border in terms of importing, exporting, where Uzbekistan has made a lot of progress, but much more is required. And then, additionally, as I mentioned, from the FDI and more generally investment facilitating aspects which are related to the WTO accession. I can go into more details, I don't want to take time, but I'll mention that there is some services that stand out. Within industries, the motor vehicles, the chemicals are said to benefit substantially. Within services, there is banking, business services, construction, wholesale, retail, double-digit rates of growth. So there is a lot of, and again, in the aggregate, a massive benefit for the country. But this brings me again to emphasize the critical point. WTO accession can be made properly, can be made not properly. And really, it is the ambition of the country, as Aziz was also saying, starting indeed from His Excellency the Presidency, that drives then realizing these massive benefits, because he has to become an anchor for a transformation of the investment climate of the business environment in the country, which can then leverage this massive inflow of investment, domestic and external, and generate the trade benefits. Thank you.
Yes, I think this is a really important point that you made at the end about speed versus depth. Because, when you make ambitious plans, then people start to say, well, why isn't WTO accession completed quickly? But actually, you want to have the right WTO accession, you want to be prepared for membership, the obligations of membership, and you want the economy to be ready for the opening. So this is my sort of non-specialist take on this, but it's a really important point that it's really important that it's done properly. And Antonio, those numbers are phenomenal. You mentioned 2 percentage points. When we looked this morning, there was an IMF projection of global growth, and it was in the region of 2 to 3%. 2 percentage points more is phenomenal. And then there's those figures from the Uzbekistan studies, 10% with regard to growth, 20% with regard to FDI. They are amazing. So I think you have proved to us the tangible benefits. Antonio, I'm just going to come back to you, and I will enforce the 1 minute. If there were one thing, you have Mr. Uranov here, if there were one thing that you would suggest that should be done to accelerate the WTO integration process for the coming months, the year, what would you suggest?
Thank you, Mandeep. Allow me to put a postscriptum to my previous answer, though, because it's very important. I talked about the growth, about the investment. What I haven't mentioned is that this translates, of course, in jobs, and my colleagues have estimated it translates in higher real wages, both for skilled and unskilled, substantial increases, again, in the right of 10+%, and it translates in poverty reduction, more than 500,000 people moving out of poverty. I want to emphasize that because, again, the skeptics sometimes say, oh, this is just for the elite. This is not at all. This is really a transformation of the country that benefits the population at large. That's why really it's so important. But let me turn back to your question. I would focus in the immediate on addressing some of the technical issues that need to be resolved to accelerate the accession. There are some measures that I think Uzbekistan is maintaining, but they are not consistent with WTO agreements. Let me give you a few examples. One is, for instance, Uzbekistan still uses quotas, quantitative restrictions to imports. And they've been trying to sort of argue why these are needed for them. In fact, within WTO discipline, there is only very specific cases and timeframes when quotas can be used. And so unless Uzbekistan is able to defend, rationalize those quotas within those exceptions, within those procedures, they cannot de facto proceed to accession without removing them. So having this justification in line with the actual provisions of the WTO discipline is important. It needs to be addressed. A second example is export subsidies. Uzbekistan has been making a lot of progress in analyzing the issues. And they are preparing towards sort of addressing the issue of removing export subsidies. This is important to improve competition and also to enhance the competitiveness of exporters in the long term. So it's another key area. And I would say two more, if you allow me. One is the harmonization of taxes between sort of local producers and importers. That's also an essential piece of, again, the WTO, if you will, philosophy and discipline. And the final one also, Uzbekistan has a lot of state trading enterprises. And, and that's not a problem per se, but in Uzbekistan, those state trading enterprises impose some restrictions. And I think there needs to be a solution to how to, in a way, adjust the way in which the state trading is done in a way which is consistent indeed with the WTO legislation. So I would say those four because I'm aware that they are, a little bit technical, but important in order to advance. Thank you.
Okay, you mentioned the word discipline in there, but I'm going to have to enforce some more discipline because our colleagues also need to go on to their evening plans. But thank you, Antonio. That was really very, very helpful. So David Hoffman is the head of the USAID mission here, as I mentioned. So just to be very clear, Antonio was very clear with his use of trade terms. He didn't blind us with jargon. USAID is actually the development agency of the US government, or the development arm of the US government. It is not the US trade representative, so David and his agency and the part of the US government he works for are not involved in the negotiations. So just let me make that clear to the participants before we start. So I know that USAID has supported many countries, David, with WTO accession, both before and after they've joined, and you were doing the same in Uzbekistan. So could you explain to us a little bit how this fits in the development strategy that you have as an agency in various countries, but specifically also in Uzbekistan, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mandeep, for the question. And I'm happy that you pointed out that the relationship or the difference between USAID, which is the Development Assistance and Humanitarian Assistance arm of the United States government, and the Office of the United States Trade Representative, which has a very specific mission to negotiate the best deal possible for the American people in these sorts of negotiations. What I would say in responding to your question is that USAID, we enthusiastically support Uzbekistan's WTO accession process, but really seen through the prism of our development mission here in Uzbekistan. We have a highest level strategic objective, which is, you might say, up in the clouds a bit. It's prosperity and stability in Uzbekistan. And so our work with Aziz and his team in the government of Uzbekistan, the private sector, is really part of a continuum of support. If you look at our efforts across the board in the economic space in Uzbekistan, you will see very clearly highlighted economic liberalization, private sector competitiveness, a more supportive business enabling environment, transparency, and integration, both regionally but also globally, in part, of course, it's no secret, to attract high-level American companies and investors here as well. And the pathway to each and every one of those development objectives leads us right to and through WTO accession for all of the reasons that we've heard today already. So this is the reason we've been supporting Uzbekistan's WTO accession since 2018. Again, whether that's assisting in the amendment of law, the legal and regulatory framework, drafting, or supporting the drafting and submission of key documents, memorandum on foreign trade regime, things like that, and of course, supporting Uzbekistan's participation in the working party meetings. Again, we will continue to make available expertise, international expertise, Uzbekistan expertise for the Uzbekistan government team. I want to focus again here and emphasize that this is technical expertise. So we are not party to the negotiations, we're not part of USTR, but interesting. But we, our vested interest is in helping Uzbekistan get across the finish line and in providing them the technical tools to meet these demands and to confront these challenges because, as you pointed out, there are tough calculations and compromises and trade-offs that need to be made. In addition to direct technical expertise, of course, we do our best to try and use convening power to create dialogue platforms where many of these issues can be discussed and resolved with key stakeholders, not only from the government, but for the business community, of course. So, Aziz, I think we met last September at a conference, WTO conference that USAID was proud to support, where we were able to bring together policy makers, stakeholders, talk about, again, issues such as agricultural trade, regional trade agreements, implementation status, et cetera. We, of course, are also looking at the same time to help prepare the business community in Uzbekistan businesses to not only help push forward, but then to take advantage of WTO accession. Again, this is creating new opportunities, and we want for Uzbek businesses to turbocharge their exports, of course, and then to meet new standards. And so I'll just, some small examples. We've been working with Uzbek food producers to meet both halal and kosher food standards certification in order to expand their markets here and now to Gulf countries, European markets, and American markets. So, in fact, later on today, I'll be joining an event that will join American chambers of commerce from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan to talk about exactly this issue. I do want to note that USAID's efforts are lockstep and coordinated with those of other arms of the United States government. So Department of Commerce, for example, has a program called the Commercial Law Development Program, and actually my colleague back in Washington, our Deputy Assistant Administrator, Anjali Kaur, will be speaking actually at a CLDP event on the Middle Corridor. So again, very much in the spirit of our blended support, direct support to Uzbekistan's WTO ascension, but then also what I would call WTO ascension adjacent support in terms of overall competitiveness, overall support for trade diversification for Uzbekistan. So what I want to emphasize also is, as I mentioned, our support for economic liberalization and growth preceded what I would say is the Uzbekistan's latest push for WTO accession, and it will continue afterwards as well. We want to make sure to focus on WTO accession as something that, of course, is a result in and of itself, but also as a catalyst for broader macroeconomic and fiscal reform. So this is something where we are, again, as a development agency, we have the luxury of looking
my, let's say, previous experience, I'm now heading an organization which is very technical in its nature. The Economic Commission, our strength is expertise, the experts, and data shows the benefits of a country acceding to WTO. It brings benefits, it brings economic development, and this is the key aspect that I would like to be like really the line that we have to keep in mind. Accession brings benefits to the country, to the government, to the private sector, to the citizens. So it's a win-win situation, and we don't have many situations like those in the international arena, so we have to keep that in mind. Now, about the experience and the work that we are doing, what are the most, from our experience of working with Uzbekistan in many areas, not only on trade-related aspects, but specifically on trade, I think there are some issues that I would like to concentrate upon, like what is important next. I think it's important to understand, yes, as my predecessor was speaking and referring about the importance of complying and fulfilling and adhering to compliance. It's important. It's also very important that without ensuring in parallel that you have this trade facilitation aspects in place, so just reducing the barriers to trade, we won't see those benefits happening, even being a member, if you don't prepare this in parallel with additional processes on trade facilitation. It's not happening. This is why for us it was very important in working in programs like SPECA, many of you might have known, on digitalizing the road, the transport corridors, to make sure that we don't spend too much time in procedures when we transport goods on the roads. This is key. So working on connectivity and trade facilitation. Otherwise, speaking about integration into a multilateral system without being integrated physically or from the practical side, it's not work. So this is one observation. And what I'm very, very pleased to see is that in our study, you rightly pointed out, I mean, it's not only with Uzbekistan, we actually work with, we're supporting countries from our members, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan as well. We are working with them, and Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, because they are also member in the process, in the discussion, if not exactly accession, discussion about possible accession to WTO. We have prepared a study also in 2023 about the situation on the regional report on sustainable and digital trade facilitation in Central Asia. And it showed that 67% implementation rate of trade facilitation measures, so in the region, and Uzbekistan leading, 85%. So for me, this is very important. So already, and it increased from 2021, just in a few years, from 62% to 85%. So this is really impressive. I think now it's about continuing this trend and maintaining always. This is the most challenging part. You know, you reach to a certain level and then maintaining the level. This is the challenge. Another important aspect that I would like to underline, and on which we are concentrating and working, is to make sure that we include in this process about WTO accession, that we make it an inclusive one. It's not about our engagement with the government only, with the ministries. It's also with the private sector. So the private sector, in particular, SMEs, MSMEs, I mean, this is key. We have to make sure that together we prepare the sector to be able to be on the competitive side. This is why we have projects like for agriculture, for producers, to include them in the international trade and facilitate their access to the trade to make them more competitive. We'll have a workshop, I think, in June, later in June, for the Central Asian countries, but it will be happening here in Tashkent to really help. So it's not only about compliance, once again, which is very important. You cannot accede without that, but there are some supporting measures in the process. So working on making this a comprehensive exercise, not an isolated one, addressing legislative or regulatory aspects, but also preparing the private sector and also working in parallel with the neighbor. It's a regional effort. It's not a country effort. It's a regional effort to make sure that you can benefit from this accession point. That is shortly. If there are more specific questions, I'm ready to engage on that.
Thank you, Ms. Molchan. So you really put also a really practical side to the discussions. You're right, it's not just about laws, it's not just about negotiations in capitals, it's really, you know, preparing producers. So it's about investment in infrastructure, it's about procedures. So your work sounds very important, so thank you for telling us about that. I've been asking all of the speakers one question, because you know the WTO agenda is very large, there's very many processes. Very, very quickly, if you permit me, do you have one priority for work in the coming months that would accelerate the progress for the coming months? Thank you.
Well, priority, everything is priority lately. It's very difficult. I'll refer to one which I had the experience, and this is where we already engaged with the country. It's priority is also to focus and to finalize bilateral discussions with the country. It's still a formality, accession. It's still you have to negotiate with countries. So I think priority now is to really have good diplomatic skills. So there's also about that, to really be able to promote the needs of the country and to explain to advance. So I think a lot of efforts in the country now also needs to be directed towards negotiation, bilateral, finalizing the bilateral negotiations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Molchan, that's really helpful. So I will allow the chief negotiator one last word before I start to conclude. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that Madame Molchan was personally engaged in our Uzbekistan's accession process before moving to UN system. And I would like to extend our appreciation for her lead, supporting Uzbekistan, because Moldova was one of the, I would say, first countries saying yes to Uzbekistan in our accession, and it was under her lead. Once again, thank you.
Excellent. So we didn't manage to have the video at the beginning, but we will have the video hopefully at the end. I'd like to conclude the session, and I would like to really appreciate and thank all of our speakers who brought different perspectives and answered my question more or less long about the priorities for accession. But so you've heard today, really, you know, WTO accession is a long and very complex process, and it involves really a lot of hard work. I pushed everybody a little bit for some priorities, and what did we hear? We heard preparations for the next working party, and Ms. Molchan also said, you know, preparing also the bilateral negotiations is very important, because those can be tough. There's the domestic reform agenda, the upgrading of the economy, the legislative reforms, etc. And Mr. Urunov said that this would really be his priority over the summer. I hope you get some summer holidays as well. It's important to rest as well as to work. One of the issues that was raised by our colleagues on the panel was also the issue of addressing any incompliant measures and not having any further incompliant measures. This is really an important thing for WTO members to know that the commitments that were made are good and they will be made in the future. And actually, and we discussed how this was really a whole of government work, but it's actually almost a whole of society, as Ms. Molchan as well just mentioned. You know, it's a private sector, and as David mentioned, you need to also socialize the public. So there's a job to be done of socialization, and we're doing it hopefully today, and hopefully this will continue. So we were convinced, however, I think there were really some spectacular numbers discussed today about, you know, there's really opportunities in the WTO process. But if it is managed well, and I am confident that it is in good hands, there is a trade-off, economists like trade-offs, right, between speed and quality and depth. And Uzbekistan is working hard with its partners, but it's also, you know, really pushing for its own economic interests, as well as looking prospectively to opportunities for the future. Beyond sort of the trade area, and I think of interest to those in the room today, is one of the key things that is interesting in the multilateral trading system and the rules-based trading system is the level playing field that the WTO accession will help to create. Both for international trade, but actually also it does that also for investment, rules-based systems, predictability. Conversely, we also heard, and I speak to the investors out in the room, that along with the regulatory reforms, we need investment in the country in order to facilitate the process. So I said this before, but I will say it again because I know very personally that it's true, that Uzbekistan's commitment to WTO is one of the top priorities of the country, and this comes really from the top of the country, from His Excellency, the President himself, and so there is no need to doubt that. So this accession is important for Uzbekistan, but what I want to conversely say also, and it was touched a little bit by the ambassador, that this is also a very important accession to the world. If you look around the world and you look at non-WTO members, there are very few that have the economic importance or broader political or strategic importance of Uzbekistan. Really, the world is invested and interested in this accession. So with that, I'm just going to say a very good luck to our colleague, Mr. Urdanov. The accession process is really in good hands, but it really requires the whole of government and private sector and society almost to get behind this process and support it. And I look forward to continuing to see the progress. It's really been very impressive over the last year, and I hope it continues. Now, unfortunately, this was supposed to be at the beginning of our session, but I'm very pleased to see that we will hopefully have Deputy Director General of the WTO, Mr. Zhang, we will see on the screen, and hopefully we'll be able to see and hear him now. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties, and I hope you have a restful and enjoyable evening and continue to have stimulating discussions tomorrow. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to join this session virtually today. At the first Tashkent International Investment Forum 2 years ago, I had the honor to be with President Mirziyoyev at the plenary session. I said, Uzbekistan has everything but one. What the country is missing is a multilateral trading system, embodied in the membership of the WTO, that provides a fair and predictable international business environment. I was encouraged by the President's response that Uzbekistan plans to speed up its effort to join the WTO in the next few years. 2 years on, I'm pleased to witness that accession process has been intensified and that concrete progress has been registered in all fronts of the negotiation with WTO members. This includes the conclusion of bilateral market access negotiations with 8 members, the advancement of multilateral negotiation on specific commitments, large-scale domestic reforms aimed at bringing national legislation in line with WTO rules, and the establishment of a domestic review process to ensure WTO consistency in Uzbekistan's legislation. I would like to acknowledge the direction given by Deputy Prime Minister Jashid Kujiev and the hard work done by Chief Negotiator Azbek Unov and his interagency team. Today's session, linking WTO integration with new horizons for economic development, is very timely in setting out the goals for the next phase of accession process, as the next round of negotiations is expected to take place later this month in Geneva. Let me use the next few minutes to highlight potential benefit of WTO membership for Uzbekistan, which I believe are relevant for the audience today. First, accession to the WTO will provide immense market access opportunities for Uzbek business and exports, as Uzbekistan will improve the terms of the trade with WTO members. This in turn will lead to creating additional jobs and significantly raising living standards. Second, the WTO accession is accompanied by large-scale, ambitious legislative reforms, which aim at creating a transparent and non-discriminatory regulatory trade regime, reforming legislation in line with international trade rules will help the country improve governance and increase competition on the domestic market. Uzbekistan is naturally a country that is attractive for foreign investment. It holds a strategic geographical position, is abundant in natural resources, and has a large domestic market. Streamlining legislation will only add to the ease of doing business and attract more investment. WTO membership can thus bring some very tangible benefit for Uzbekistan's investment climate. Upon accession to the WTO, Uzbekistan will assume international obligations and will be deeply integrated into the multilateral trading system. In the eyes of foreign investors, this brings certainty and stability, a guarantee that the regulatory regime will not change overnight, something investors are deeply interested in. Third, with the further opening up of the domestic market, more Uzbek companies will have opportunities to cooperate with foreign enterprises. They will engage in exchange of best business management practice with their counterparts, borrow advanced technologies, and thus become more competitive in the international market. On behalf of the WTO, I look forward to working with Uzbekistan to advance its goal of joining the WTO in the near future. Thank you.